Hello everyone and welcome to the latest edition of the press conference review. I am still here at the AXA Training Centre, hiding from the rain after what was a pretty calm and measured pre-match press conference from Arne Slot ahead of the game against Bournemouth. There was no real hint of the bombshell that was to come. We will talk about that bombshell, namely Andy Robertson's potential move to Spurs, but before we get into that, let's do what we always do on this show, which is talk about the team news, updates, injuries, etc. Federico Chiesa missed the game against Marseille with a knock he picked up the day before in training. There was no sign from Arne Slot whether or not he would be back in the squad. It all depends upon how he gets through the training session today, but it did sound like he was in contention, if certainly not guaranteed to come back into the squad. The news with Konaté is generally a little bit more downbeat. I think you all know by now the personal tragedy that he suffered, and Slot is very keen to give him as much time and space as he needs to deal with that situation. Didn't really want to talk too much about it today, understandably, and I want to pass on all of my good thoughts to Konaté and his whole family, but do not expect to see him in the South Coast this weekend. So, Andy Robertson then. Kind of came out of left field. You see what I did there? Left side, left field. Anyhow, there's been a lively debate here amongst the journalists as to whether this is a good move or whether it's a bit of a strange one. You can understand why Andy Robertson may think that it's time for him to leave Liverpool. Arne Slot today spoke about how much improvements he's seen out of Milos Kerkez, not only in his performances, but also in his durability, his consistency. Slot says that he now believes he can play weekend, midweek, weekend, which he is doing for the first time in his professional career, and it wasn't sure if he was able to get up to it. I know as an outmarcation he played European football, but it wasn't quite as intense at the level that Liverpool are playing. But it now seems like Slot trusts Kerkez to be able to handle that workload, which is bad news for Robertson and his hopes of playing more football. But then this is Tottenham. Tottenham are a team in the Champions League and probably will remain in the Champions League for at least a couple more games. But they are a team that is naturally quite unstable in comparison to Liverpool. We don't know what's happening with their manager, Thomas Frank. Arguably, you could say the same about Liverpool. But we don't know necessarily what the plans are for that position. Ben Davies, obviously, who was a left-back option, has just got a long-term injury. But Destiny Udogie is still there. Jed Spence has been playing left-back quite often. So there are other players for him to fight through in order to get there. And then comes into the idea of the transfer fee, because yes, he's a 31-year-old who is within 6 months of the end of his deal, but he is someone who Liverpool value very highly in terms of his experience. Someone who clearly Spurs value very highly in terms of them wanting to bring him in the building and being so desperate to move it up from the summer to January. It remains to be seen whether or not the two clubs can come together on a fee. That might be the deciding factor. For Liverpool, we don't know what this means in terms of how his squad place will be replaced. There is the option of recalling Kostas Tsimikas from his loan at Roma, and I believe he's only played less than 400 minutes so far for Roma, so I'm sure they wouldn't necessarily be that bothered about losing him. But what does that mean for Liverpool in terms of what kind of player are you getting back? And his contract itself, I believe, ends in the summer of 2027, so you cannot really say that he's a long-term solution to this issue. Do Liverpool go back into the transfer market? At this point in the window, I'd say it's unlikely, unless there is someone, again, who they had on their long-term board, who they, like Spurs, can maybe move a bit forward 6 months or maybe even longer. But personally, I think it would be a shame if Andy Robertson left mid-season. I think that there might well be one last hurrah in here if he decides to stay until the end of the season, not just in terms of him getting a proper send-off that he deserves for all of his service at the club, but maybe even one last crack at the Champions League final. I doubt he'll get that with Spurs, that's for sure. Anyway, enough on that. Let's get to the top takeaways, shall we? Top takeaway number one: the time to assess the new signings is not now. This was something that I discussed on the LFC TV preview show with Sammy Lee earlier today. You may be seeing it later this afternoon. And that is the idea that we in the football world, whether it be fans or media, are always trying to assess players immediately. You always want to say, is this player a bust? Is this player a genius? Almost immediately after coming into a new club. But that's not really how it goes. Liverpool signed a lot of players for a lot of money in the summer, but the majority of them are young players, and either young players coming into a new league or young players coming up to an elite level where they weren't before. So it's going to take them time to adapt. And I think you're seeing now evidence of that. You're seeing Jeremy Frimpong, Milos Kerkez, Florian Wirtz are all starting to look like the players who Liverpool hoped they had when they signed them. And whereas outside noise means that it's always difficult for those players when they aren't hitting the ground running, I think there was always quiet confidence within the building here at Liverpool that they would get to that point. I think you have someone like Hugo Ekitike who hit the ground running, and I would argue of all of the new signings, the one who you really want to hit the ground running is the guy who's responsible for scoring goals, because I think even more than someone like Florian Wirtz, the pressure would have been on Hugo had he not been able to get the goals, particularly with what's happened with Isak. Now for Isak and Leone, obviously that assessment naturally is going to be delayed until next season because of their injury situations. But I think with all of the new signings, you would expect them to look better the longer into the season they go, the more time they've had to work with their teammates. I think for Kerkez and for Wirtz in particular, you are seeing now connections with teammates that were maybe a little bit difficult earlier on in the season, now starting to become a little bit more natural. And hopefully that's something we'll see from all of these new signings. But it's probably just another reminder for all of us not to go too early on these assessments of how good or bad these signings are. If you talk about Liverpool's transfer window as a whole, I think we've gone through the whole gamut of it being the best window ever to it's a disaster, and now it's looking like the best window ever again. Maybe we should just hold off on our judgment. None of these players have signed 6-month contracts or 1-year contracts. They signed 3, 4, 5-year contracts. They are here for the long term, and that's how they should be assessed. Top takeaway number 2, Slot's tactics have been hurt by injuries, which sounds like an obvious thing to say, but I think more often than not when we think about injuries, we think about missing personnel and we think about a team generally missing chemistry. But I think in terms of tactical tweaks, in terms of formations, some of the things that Arne Slot has wanted to try this season, he hasn't been able to pursue with. And he mentioned that in the press conference today. For example, he mentioned the fact that Alexander Isak slowly starting to look good. Then he got injured against Spurs. He had the game against Inter where the two of them played together, and you wonder whether that was something that Liverpool could have pursued with, but then injury got in the way. You had a similar situation with the right backs. You had Bradley and Frimpong playing in tandem, playing really well together at Fulham. Very next game, Bradley gets his big injury. So as much as it's been a season where Slot has really looked like he struggled to find the right tactical game plan that suits the players he has, maybe we should have cut him a little bit more slack in terms of when the times when he looks like he's found something to go on, he's had to go back to the drawing board. I know that sympathy is probably running quite thin for Arne Slot where we sit at the moment in terms of every one of his decisions being scrutinised by myself and everyone else as well. But maybe this is something that we should take into account. And again, when you look at how he's been able to deal with some of these situations, Liverpool still find themselves in a fighting chance of getting back into the Champions League next season and to be able to get into the latter stages this season and potentially win another trophy. So in a season that has been far from perfect, in a year that has seen far too many draws, far too many disjointed performances, the fact is that Liverpool are still in with a chance of salvaging this season. So maybe we should wait until May before we're assessing really how good or how bad Slot has been. Top takeaway number 3, Bournemouth might be beatable because they are predictable. Now that sounds like an insult to Bournemouth. It's not intended to be an insult to Bournemouth. They are a very, very good side, but what you get from them is what you see every single time. So you know they're going to be intense, you know they're going to press high, you know they're going to have a never say die attitude, which means they're going to keep coming whatever the scoreline is, and that is very, very tough to play against. But it is the same. It does allow you to game plan for it. And something that Arne Slot said last week, and he kind of hinted at again this week, is that so many teams have come up against Liverpool and completely changed how they play against everybody else. Now, part of that is because Liverpool have given teams incentive to change by having certain characteristics which they've been unable to play well against. You know what I'm talking about. We don't need to go into it again. But that has meant that if you're a team who has the ability to play in that particular manner, then you're going to do it if you think it's going to get results. Bournemouth aren't like that. Bournemouth play and act like an elite team. Now, what elite teams generally do is that they impose their game on you. They don't change their game to suit whatever you might do. But that does mean that Liverpool can plan and anticipate what they're going to get. And if you look at the games Liverpool played really well in this season, Aston Villa, Arsenal, Manchester City, Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid, even Marseille. These are teams who are also considering themselves elite teams who want to impose their football on someone else, who are less likely to change how they do things to suit this game. So, what that means is that Liverpool might well have a good chance to play well against Bournemouth again. I'm not necessarily saying that Bournemouth are going to be a team who play out from the back and give them lots of space, but I do think in terms of what Liverpool are trying to plan beforehand, when they're making game plans, there's not going to be any late surprises. I would say Bournemouth are probably still going to be a much more dangerous side than some people would consider, considering that they've lost Antoine Semenyo. But I know for a fact that Arne Slot and his team will not be taking this game lightly. Now it's time to hear from Arne Slot about my question, which is all about our good friend Joe Gomez. Hi Arne, I wanted to ask you a word about Joe Gomez. It was another opportunity for him to come into the first team and show the elite level without having necessarily a whole lot of football. And his main battle this season has really been fitness. I know you've used him a lot of fullback in comparison to a centre-back, and it's almost there's a little bit of different physical demands on fullback in terms of getting up and down and contributing to attack and defence. So in terms of trying to keep Joe fit, has there been any conversations around maybe keeping him at centre-back now that obviously you've got Calvin Ramsey and Szoboszlai who can play as a fullback?
No, I think what we always try to do is prepare players for the demands of the game. So if we think we need him as a fullback, we prepare him for the demands of what it takes to play as a fullback. But he played a very, very good game as a centre-back, but I also liked him a lot when he played as a fullback against Inter Milan. So I think he's one of the few players maybe that doesn't have to play a lot of games and still play at a very high level. So that is very positive. And like you said, he's not been available always, but this season much more than last season. And it's good to have him because he played a good game off the ball. But I also remember a few balls through the lines that were really effective as the lead up for the 3-0 he was part of. So 2 days turnaround, hasn't played many games, so let's see how he feels today and if he's able to start Saturday.
Now I had plenty of questions in my back pocket today, but as the president of the Joe Gomez fan club, I felt the need to kind of bring him up considering no one else had done so. It is interesting to me to hear that Liverpool do look at training differently. They do tailor different training to different positions because the demands of being a centre-back and being a full-back are so different, and we can almost be fooled by that considering how many players now play both positions. It wasn't the same previously. Full-back was a specialist position, centre-back was a specialist position, but now maybe because there's so many teams who like to play three or at the back as well, so you have centre-backs who are used to going out into wide areas, maybe that's changed. But the reality is, if you're a right back or a left back, you're going to be doing a lot more running than if you're a centre back. Now, we've already mentioned the fact that Konaté is not going to be in the squad most likely. So Liverpool are only going to have two first choice centre backs to call on for this game. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Arne Slot is looking at them differently and is looking to maybe protect Gomez anymore. He did say that he likes what he gets from him as a fullback, and I think that's fair. I think we've looked at Joe Gomez playing right back this season and said that he can do the job. I just wonder whether or not it's the best use of him. I think he's a fantastic centre-back. I think we got to see that against Marseille. The way that what he gives as a passing centre-half through the lines is something that you don't get from Konaté, that we haven't really had since Joel Matip alongside Virgil van Dijk. So I think he's just a massive asset to play at centre-back. So I would be less inclined to play him at right-back. Obviously, there's also Calvin Ramsey, there's also Dominic Szoboszlai, there's also Wataru Endo, who in theory could cover both positions. But me personally, I'd be looking to keep Joe as a centre-back. I dare say if you asked him, he'd probably say the same. So there you have it, that is today's press conference review. Now, there will be an update on the Andy Robertson situation after the post-match press conference against Bournemouth, so expect to hear more on that. I once again have been given Manchester duty. I will be at Manchester City against Wolves, so my match report will cover that game. But I will also be giving some of my thoughts about Liverpool in the next weeks to come, on the late challenge, on the Anfield wrap, and maybe more on This Is Anfield as well. I'm hoping to be able to announce something a little bit special for all my Substack viewers and subscribers in the next week to 10 days. But I will hold off on that for now and say thank you for joining me. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to tell your friends about this channel if you like what you see. I'll see you again soon.